Happy Black History Month, everyone. I hope you all are celebrating our beautiful people, culture, music, and history today, this month, and every month. Joining me today on the Cervantes podcast is my very good friend who I've known for 15 years, Miss Taylor John. Taylor is an international relations, citizenship, and civic engagement major with a focus in global health and policy. And she's a minor in Chinese language, studying at Syracuse University, where she's a One Love campus ambassador and a One Love youth advisory board. She's the creator of TayTalks, a lifestyle, wellness, beauty, and travel brand to empower trauma survivors. She's a fellow podcaster like myself with her podcast titled TayTalks Unapologetically Me, where she leads discussions with people surrounding her life passion of wellness and community to hopefully inspire purpose in others. Taylor, how are you? How are you doing?
Hi, Cervantes. First, thank you so much for having me on your platform. This is so awesome, and I'm so looking forward to just chatting with you about this topic.
First, I wanted to ask you, what made you want to become a One Love campus ambassador?
Sure. So first, I'll just share a little bit about what One Love is. So One Love is an organization that was founded in memory of Yardley Love. She was a lacrosse player at UVA who was in a abusive relationship, and unfortunately, that relationship resulted in her murder. Her parents wanted to, as well as her sister, and her aunt wanted to create an organization that promoted healthy love and that shared the 10 signs of an unhealthy relationships and a 10 signs of healthy relationships. So the organization basically created workshops, different educational materials to spread to high schoolers, colleges, and actually now we are educating elementary school students.
Um,
So that was is kind of the gist of what One Love is about. Their headquarters are based in Westchester, actually in
oh
Bronxville, New York.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, and for me, One Love came to my school when I was playing lacrosse, when I was in high school, and we watched Escalation, which is it's a two-part video or 2-day video about kind of it shapes maybe like the week of Yardley's death, and it gives a description of how you can see relationship abuse mentally, physically, also emotionally, and from that experience, I just was so invested in One Love and reached out to them in college just to do some work, and then they reached out to me to apply as a campus ambassador and again to be on their youth advisory board. So since I've been here, I've been doing a lot of great work, hosting workshops, educating the community. I'm talking a lot about One Love on my own podcast, but also engaging with others. I did a collab event with Planned Parenthood. So yeah, that's why I started. Um, well, that's about One Love and why I got into it. Being a survivor of a domestic abusive relationship, I and intimate partner violence, I wanted to help others. The best way for me along my healing journey has been about education. So not only educating myself about what happened to me, but also educating others so that people are aware, but also so that we can prevent these unhealthy behaviors. I truly believe that if I can just talk about this topic to one person and it clicks, then maybe that person will hopefully recognize red signs, right? Red flags in a relationship. So that's why I engage with One Love.
Right. I think that's beautiful because I think sometimes it's a very, quote unquote touchy subject, but it's a real thing. It's not just, white women in Hollywood. It's, it could happen to anyone, men
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. It can happen to men, it can happen to women, it can happen in a to the transgender community, right? It doesn't
right,
matter what race you are. It can happen to an Indian woman. It doesn't
right,
matter what your gender is, what your sexual preference is, what your religion is. It can happen to anyone, and it can happen anywhere. And I think that's the thing to remember because in movies and TV shows, right, we see it um, in a dark alley with a stranger, right, walking home alone. We see it mostly happening to women, young women,
right.
but That's not true. In my case, it was actually with someone who I knew, someone who I trusted, someone who I felt close to, and it didn't happen in a dark alley. It happened in my home,
Mhm.
in my dorm. So thinking about and in a space for me that was my safe space, right? Whereas in TV shows, it's not like that.
Right?
It's
It's oftentimes like, oh, this is like a scary stranger man that I've never met, that a woman's never met, and then the woman is like attacked, and then it's like we never hear from the unknown. Like, no, it could be a husband and a wife, boyfriend and girlfriend,
right,
a friend. I feel like oftentimes when traumatic things happen, when it comes to stuff like that, it's oftentimes somebody that
right,
you
absolutely,
know, and
absolutely.
that takes advantage of you. So I think that's important to realize. What made you feel so confident in sharing your story?
So I actually didn't really disclose my story officially,
Okay.
mainly because I have seen the way college campuses have handled these type of cases. I also wanted to protect the organizations that I'm involved in. I do sit on a lot of leadership positions here in my community, and so I was very worried at first in regards to that. But when I later decided to disclose, and my story is actually kind of unique. I didn't realize I was in the abuse relationship until I was removed from it.
Wow.
Which is actually a very common thing when you are in a relationship. You do miss a lot of the signs, um, and so I didn't know. And an incident occurred, and that incident made me realize, like, I had a oh shoot moment, like whoa. And then since then, I probably disclosed to a few people. But once I started my podcast and I started talking about this topic, I realized how many people I was touching. One Love had asked me in November for Domestic Violence Awareness Month to share my survivor story, and this was the first time I'd shared my story completely to the public. And that experience, when we did hosted a Q&A right after. There were young
Wow.
students who were asking me questions, who felt so inspired, who didn't realize these things that they also experienced, and I was like, yeah, this is my calling. This is what I'm called to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. So from that initial disclosure, I think that's what made me want to share it more. I definitely have been a lot more open with my experience. I was hesitant to share too because I didn't want my parents finding out over social media. But I recently disclosed to both of them, so I'm now more comfortable with sharing that and having my story out there to help others. But yeah, and it's a real beautiful thing when you know that your message
It's helping people.
just helping people has resonated with someone, or even just people asking questions have been like a great experience for me.
That's so awesome. I think, I really commend you. I'm proud of you because that's not easy to talk about. That's not an easy subject, especially if you're Black,
Yeah, absolutely. I
you
think,
know?
yeah, being Black and sharing this, the statistics are actually crazy. For Black women, you're 40%, you have a 40% chance, like higher chance of being a victim of this kind of abuse than your white counterparts. 1 in 3 women already will experience sexual violence, but if you're Black, that number just gets even
It
greater.
goes up.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
And then also age plays a factor, just looking college campuses, college age women. But yeah, being Black and addressing this topic, I think, has probably been one of the coolest things because I'm learning more about Black women in this field or topic. But
Right.
it is definitely challenging. I think that's why I initially was afraid to disclose, because as a Black woman, you're painted as someone who's strong, right? We're supposed to hold everybody else up. We're supposed to, support our family, support our friends, support the Black men in our lives. Like, that's what society teaches us. But then who's supporting us?
Who
Um,
holds your hand? Who
Hold. Right.
Who, yeah, who takes care of you? Mhm.
Exactly. And then, as you know, I'm Caribbean, and even just talking about sexual abuse
It's a whole other
it's a
animal.
whole other thing in our culture. Like, and that was initially why I was afraid to disclose to my mom, was because of that. And my parents have done everything in their power, right, to prevent me from experiencing this type of violence. And I remember when I first disclosed with my dad, back in the fall, he was hurt, one, that I kept it in so long, um, but also hurt that, like, was there anything I could have done? And there's nothing, right? But I do think something that we can do as a Black community, as a community of color, as the Caribbean community, is have these conversations about wellness, mental health, violence and abuse, right? Educate ourselves, but normalize the conversation, because it's very real. And statistics show us that, right? This happens way too often than we'd like to. And I do believe that it can be preventative if we talk about it, if we educate ourselves, if we address it. But if we keep ignoring the elephant in the room, one, that's not healthy for survivors. And two, that's not building a foundation of trust and love in a family. Like, in my own personal eyes, I really do think that we have to have these conversations with friends and peers. Like, we can't
Right.
just not talk about it. It's like ignoring race. Like, you can't just
Yes.
ignore race. Like, racism exists, violence, abuse exists. It's the same thing.
In multiple, it doesn't have to just be like it doesn't have to just be like murder or
Right.
like robbery. Like there's, it's violence can occur in many different ways. Police brutality,
Right.
you know, rape.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there's
And it's
different
not even just physical, and that's something that I'm working to digest right now with TayTalks, is that abuse is not just physical and sexual, it's also mental and emotional. And I was a victim of that. I was a victim of narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, gaslighting, manipulation, guilting, coercive control. And that abuse is what turned into the sexual abuse, right? So even talking about that correlation, and how in society, when we think of violence, when we think of abuse, we naturally think physical, right? Like you said, police brutality, rape, um, gender-based violence, right? Gang rape, murder,
right.
shootings. But there's also a emotional and mental component. Even as young Black kids right now, right? When you watch the news, that's trauma. That's
Yes.
traumatic. Watching another kid that's your age being gunned down by police
Over and
and
over and
over
over
again,
again.
right? We just celebrated Trayvon Martin's birthday, right?
He would have been 26 years old.
26 years old. And that's scary because we are 20,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it's just thinking about that, right? Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, like, again, watching the news is traumatic enough. And yes, we don't know this kid, right? Like, I didn't know Trayvon, I didn't know Tamir Rice, but Tamir's death is what, like, evoked my awakening.
Okay. It
It's
was that
that
one
was
for you.
that was my the death for me, that I was like, I don't know this kid, but why am I feeling like this was my brother,
Right.
right?
Right.
And why do I feel so much pain in my chest? But that is that emotional component.
Right. And I think that it like if you've experienced some type of trauma and you don't want to see trauma or talk about trauma, it makes sense why you don't. I
Mhm.
get that intention, but at the same time, in order for us to grow with anything, we have to talk about things that are hard, like, so how can we become a better country or world if we don't, you know, speak about and try to dismantle systematic racism, sexism, like certain, domestic violence, like if we don't talk about these hard things, how will it ever change or get better?
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest quote that I used to say in high school, when I was doing a lot of social justice, activism things on the campus, I would say you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? So these discussions are hard. Talking about race is hard, But once you break down that wall, you unleash so many different layers. So with trauma, I get it. Believe me, I'm someone who I don't express my feelings. I don't like talking about my feelings. I have a very hard time in general connecting with my feelings.
Right.
And something I've worked on in therapy is that. And I think if you are a trauma survivor, if you are experiencing, hardship right now, there are resources available. So, with domestic violence, National Domestic Violence Hotline is available. Resources like RAIN, Planned Parenthood, Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. There are people that are there, and you can seek counseling if you're at a university, if you're in a high school. A lot of universities do specialize in trauma training and survivor support, so you have that. It is again acknowledging that trauma is very hard to talk about, and you'll know when you're ready to talk about it. But the conversation too that comes up now is healing your inner child, right? So a lot
Right.
of us end up actually having childhood trauma that we don't realize that affects us later. I can speak for that, for myself in terms of emotional. I don't process my feelings and I don't share what's going on with my parents because when I was younger, we didn't do that all the time, right?
Mm.
My
Yeah, I
parents
can speak to
were
that.
hardworking. They were always at work, and it wasn't. I don't know. It was expected of me to always do well in school. So when I did well, it was just like whatever. But now, as I'm
And if
older,
you didn't do well, it's like, oh my God, oh my God.
right? And I had friends who like they would get an A and they'd tell their parents, and they're, "Oh, it'd be so great." I tell my parents, they'd be like, "Oh, that's great. Like you should be doing this all the time, right?" And I look at it now. We had a discussion with my family before I left, and they're like, "We really want you to like be comfortable with you sharing what's going on with you at school, like especially things like this. Like again, I didn't tell my parents for 7 months. Didn't tell my mom for almost a year, and just being more open with things. And I just think, yeah, it's definitely important to talk it out. I believe in talk therapy, so talking things out, talking with your friends. But there's also other ways to heal your trauma. Physically, you can go for walks, exercise. For me, I used to do yoga a lot, so I picked that back up. It's been
Oh,
a
great.
healing journey. Also, education, like I said, but having a routine even helps. So there's a lot of different ways. But yeah, we definitely have to acknowledge this for sure.
Right. I completely agree. And on your TayTalks Instagram, you listed signs of a healthy relationship. Could you break down, being that we just spoke about, domestic violence in a relationship, what are signs of like the opposite of that? What should be occurring in a romantic, or even friend relationship?
Signs. With healthy signs, I'll do that one first.
Okay.
Um, with healthy signs, you want things that bring out the best in you and make you feel good about yourself, right? So, a comfortable pace, trust, independence. Independence is my favorite one because I think people often forget about that. I'm someone that's very independent and I like my alone time and I like to do what I
So you
like.
can't be with someone that's like super like on top of you in terms of like a clingy way.
Yeah, it's a
No,
lot for me.
I
I
feel
I like to be able to breathe in the relationship. It's ironic enough because my love language is quality time, but to a certain extent, like
right. There's levels to it.
levels. Yeah. So independence is really great. Respect, kindness, healthy conflict. So this is a great one and something that I'm learning right now. Being able to talk to someone and express something. Like I'm trying to think of an example. So say you're setting your boundaries and
Okay.
you set your boundaries, but then something happens and that made you feel uncomfortable, right? So being able to express that you were uncomfortable and that person being able to respect that is extremely important. Instead, what would be something that would be unhealthy is you set the boundary was broken, which does happen sometimes, right? The
Right.
boundary was broken. And that could be something, let's use touch as an example. You don't like to be touched X, Y, and Z. maybe by accident, maybe it was intentional, you were touched there, right? You that however that made you feel, you expressed that to that person, but that person responds with, you're being dramatic, you're being extra, like I don't understand why I can't touch you, blah 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 blah. That is gaslighting. And that is an unhealthy sign.
Right.
So there's so that's an example with that. I'm taking responsibility. This is uh one of my favorite ones. So it's actually funny, like it's not really funny, but I laugh at it because now being involved with someone that does display healthy signs and seeing the past, um, taking responsibility was something that the previous person never did, but this current person does. And if something made me, give an example, last week my feelings were hurt and I expressed that, and automatically it was, wow, like I realized how that upset you, and I'm extremely sorry about it. Like I definitely understand, like maybe we can try this instead, right? Like I understand how that made you feel disrespected. uh,
Okay.
so
Letting the person know that, like, okay, I acknowledge it. Let me try not to do that again. I respect you. Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's really important. At least for me, I like to feel validated. So if I'm expressing my feelings and you just say, "Oh, I'm sorry," that to me sounds like you don't actually care. You're not listening. You're just saying sorry. And that's what happened with my previous relationship. It was a lot of gaslighting, manipulation, and saying sorry, but no action.
Because a true apology is changed behavior. So if you just keep saying I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, it's like it doesn't really help. You know,
Right.
and my parents always used to tell me that, like, just because you say you're sorry doesn't mean that the person has to um believe your apology, or makes it doesn't make your apology valid. So I
Right.
think that's important. I think
Right.
that's important.
And then I do want to just share a little bit of the unhealthy signs, but just want to acknowledge too that a relationship is not just with an intimate partner. It, like you said earlier, it can be with friends, teammates, family members. It could be with your classmates, group settings, with your professors or teachers, even coaches. So it goes beyond that. So again, everyone will do something unhealthy, right? But we can all learn to love better by recognizing the unhealthy signs and shifting towards healthy behaviors. Um, so, if you do see these signs, it's important to not ignore them and understand that they can escalate to abuse. And this is my favorite thing, and I really, 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 if I could give one piece of advice to folks who are experiencing this situation, trust your gut. Uh,
That's a
your
good one.
body knows more than your mind does at the time. Your mind ends up playing tricks on you, but your body will know if you're in a dangerous situation or if you're uncomfortable. I did share on my podcast, for me, my initial body reaction when I was experiencing this sexual violence at the time. I bled, and I bled for 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks straight.
Wow.
That was my body telling me that something bad had just happened, and it didn't like that. Right. So I used to
But
have,
in the process, or like when that incident occurred, your mind was maybe, was it like
yeah,
saying, "Oh,
so
this is
my
okay"?
mind actually, so my trauma response was a freeze response. So I actually didn't react. Kind
Wow.
of laid there, frozen, and I remember in my head I was just like begging for this to be over. Um,
Because it's fight, flight, and freeze.
and
There's a
fawn. There's four now. Fawn. So
okay.
fawn response is, let me try to think of like an example. So fight is attack, flight is running from, freeze is staying still or hiding, and fawn is like when you want to make peace or befriend that person. So I did have a fawn response to later. I remember I had texted the person, I think, and I was like,
Wow.
"Hey, really sorry. I don't know what happened, but like my body just froze and I don't know, like, I guess I was uncomfortable. Like that was my fawn response.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I've never heard that before. That's really interesting.
yeah, fawn is a new, fairly new,
Okay.
practitioners use this now because it's common, especially after abuse. Uh, it's a cycle. So you end up actually having a fawn response more than you think. When something is bad, the brain tells you, and the manipulation will tell you, like, okay, it's your fault. So you need to go make up with that person. So, like, I can give you an example. My friends and I had a disagreement with a friend. Like, I remember this so clearly in maybe end of eighth grade, never spoke to her until like sophomore year. And we decided to make up. Like,
Wow.
that's a fawn response, right? A
Okay.
fawn response is, you're in something that is, I hate using the word toxic, but you're in something that's super unhealthy, it's toxic, and you know it's toxic, they know it's toxic, but you just need that person, right? But the reason why you need that person is because of the other unhealthy signs, the guilting, the manipulation, the gaslighting, so you no longer have control over your mind.
Okay.
Signs. So we have intensity is when someone expresses very extreme feelings and over the top behavior that feels overwhelming. So this can be saying I love you in the first 3 weeks of your
Oh, wow.
relationship.
Okay.
Manipulation when someone tries to control your decisions, actions, or emotions. Sabotage when someone purposely ruins your reputation, achievements, or success. Sabotage is actually kind of the reason why, one of the reasons why a lot of survivors and victims don't share their survivor story. That's part of the reason why I haven't shared it publicly, is because my perpetrator is someone who would sabotage my reputation. Um, so, yeah, that's another reason. Guilting, when someone makes you feel responsible for their actions and makes you feel like it's your job to keep them happy. Deflecting responsibility, when someone repeatedly makes excuses for their unhealthy behavior. So this could be like, oh, well, in third grade, this girl broke my heart, and that's why I do this. Or, well, I had an abusive father, and this is why I do this. Well, you need to heal your, your
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
like real talk. Because what you experience, and I'm sorry that you had an abusive, parent, but now you are in control of your life. You have to be able to heal yourself so that you're not projecting that trauma onto someone else. And now causing trauma for them. And so that's why healing, I believe, is so important, um, because it really does affect your life. Trauma can affect you post relationship, post abuse. Possessiveness is when someone is jealous to a point where they try to control who you spend time with and what you do. This can also include friends. Um,
Yes,
if your
it
friends don't want you to hang out with certain friends, and not because like, hey, these friends that you hang out with are not good for you. They're forcing you to drink every day. If your friend is telling you that, they're being a good friend by making sure that you're not getting alcohol poisoning, right?
great.
If you have a friend who's like, oh, I don't think you should hang out with her because she's not cool. You should only hang out with me. That's possessive. If
Right.
you have a partner who maybe is insecure, and I say insecure because that's what it is. It's insecurities that you have friends of the opposite sex,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
that's my case. I mean, I've always been like this since I was little. I have a lot of guy friends. I just connect better with boys, and or young men now.
Right. And some men feel like, oh, like I don't, I don't want my girl to speak to other men.
Yeah, and that was the case for me. And I was like, well, that's your problem because these are my brothers, and they, more than anything, I feel safe with them. So no, but it's true. Like there are a lot of men who do have this insecurity, and I would say there are a lot of women also that do have have those insecurities, I know them.
Right.
And I'm always that when I look at my guy friends who are dating, I'm always that girl that the girl that they're dating, who they're like, the girl's like, oh, I don't know, like, are you guys really just
Like her.
like
Yeah.
her, right? So there's that. Isolation is when someone keeps you away from friends, family, or other people. Um, so same thing. Possessiveness and isolation kind of work together. Belittling is when someone does and says things to make you feel bad about yourself. So this
Like
could
emotional
be,
abuse. Yeah.
yeah, this is the emotional mental abuse. So this could be like, oh, you're so insecure. I don't know why you're wearing that. Or um I think honestly for me the best way I could describe it is like commenting on someone's body or physical appearance. Especially I think this is we see this a lot in cases where the person A has maybe a mental disability or physical disability, so the perpetrator might use that against them. So if it's like a lisp, or maybe they have OCD, or they have PTSD, or maybe they've had to have like facial reconstructive surgery or something, right? That doesn't make them seem normal. And I put quotes on normal because what really is normal. Um,
Right.
so that is something that I think is seen a lot. And
Yeah.
then volatility is when someone has a really strong, unpredictable reaction that makes you feel scared, confused, or intimidated. So a lot of times this could be escalated into like shouting, um, and then physical abuse. Um, and then betrayal is when someone is disloyal or acts in an intentionally dishonest way. I think we covered.
So those are all the signs of unhealthy.
Yes, and
Um,
there's definitely more signs that I didn't address. There's so many, but those are one love's 10 signs that they simplify. There's jealousy, gaslighting, like I mentioned. Um,
in an unhealthy relationship.
Not relationship, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was so. I think that was. I hope my listeners and anyone watching. I hope that they learn something from that, because I think a lot of times we don't. There's no class on love. I feel like there's couples therapy, but not everyone can afford that, and everyone goes to that. So I think one love and what you're doing and what many other people in the world are doing, educating people on sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic abuse. I think that's so important, because we don't talk about this enough. And oftentimes people think like, oh, like that's my girlfriend, like she can't hurt me or whatever, or like we'll just get through it, or like all relationships are like this. Like, no. A good healthy relationship should not be toxic, unhealthy. You should not
And
be raising your voice, throwing things, hurting each other, you know?
absolutely. And I will say this, that we all deserve healthy love and good love. Um, and it's so important to understand that. And I stand with other survivors who maybe feel hesitant in getting back into a relationship, or feeling like, wow, I really deserve this. I definitely have experienced this over the past couple of weeks. Um, like, oh my gosh, why is this person being so kind? Like, do I really deserve this? And you do. We all do. We deserve good love. We deserve things that make us feel good, that there's no stress in the relationship in terms of, like, you will always feel stress, like whether it's nerves, whether it's, financial stress if you live together, whatever it is, but it shouldn't stress you out so much that you're scared, right? It should be, I call it a good stress, like
Right.
stressing over bills, and like that is okay. Like that's a normal thing that you will experience in a relationship. Stressing over borrowing your friend's clothes, right?
Stressing over wanting to be a good father or
Right.
mother, a
Right. Like that,
college
I feel like,
student.
right. That's a normal, healthy stress. I mean, it could get unhealthy to a certain point, right? But if you're having to stress over, you know, oh gosh, what is this person going to think or say about me? Or I can't tell him this because he's going to react this way, or she's going to react with this way, or they're going to react this way. That's an unhealthy, behavior. And
Right.
we deserve goodness. We deserve to feel loved and special, and get flowers, and held at
Yes.
night, and
You
go
know,
movie nights with your gal pals, right? With your play basketball with your girlfriends, or go bowling with the group. Like, we deserve all that goodness.
life doesn't have to be unfair all the time. Like life is unfair and life is hard at times, but I does it doesn't mean that, we deserve to walk around melancholy, you know,
Yep. Yep.
or like it's
Mhm.
find the good. Find the good. In an episode with Peace of Mind on Facebook Watch with Taraji P. Henson and her close friend Tracy Jade, she sat down with therapist Melody Murray to discuss PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. In the episode, it was revealed that according to the American Psychological Association, only 1 in 3 Black or African American adults who need mental care actually receive it. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think some of the Black community doesn't take mental health seriously at times? Where do you think that stems from?
Yeah. So, first of all, PTSD is something that is extremely common in the Black community. I experienced PTSD twice. So, I had initially from my traumatic car accident. I couldn't
Oh
sleep,
wow!
and I used to have nightmares, fear driving, the honking of the horn. Actually,
Were you
still.
super little?
Sorry, say again.
Were you super little, like when that happened?
My accident actually happened. I was one that was driving, and actually happened 3 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah, so I say this to say that it is something that's very common. And then I had PTSD about my assault. So, and I still have it. I do think that in the Black community, we probably don't take, as a whole, as society, we don't take this seriously enough, because, again, Black people are painted as to be this strong-willed, strong-minded, force. We've accomplished racism in the sense where we don't let race and racial issues break us down, right?
Mm,
But they do break us down, right? There's
right.
times that I've cried, times that I've, had to fight for my voice to be heard in high school. And it was tiring. It's exhausting being Black. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't change being Black.
Of
Um,
course.
so
Yes.
I think that, yeah, in the Black community, like I said earlier, it's just something that same thing with health in general.
Right.
We're like superheroes, and we are superheroes for sure.
Right. But it's okay to take the cape off.
And it's okay to go check yourself, right? It's okay to say that you need help. It's okay to say that you're struggling. It's okay to say that, you're not okay. Like, it's okay
Yes,
not to
as
be.
simple as that. It's okay because I think, a lot of times that happens with Black women, like you said before. Black women are perceived as, the strong Black woman. They can take on anything. But then who takes care of them? And when do they get the love that they deserve? And then, when they decide to want better for themselves, or they're open about their sexuality, or they, let me date somebody of another race. It's like,
Mhm,
oh, she's a sellout, she's a traitor. Then with Black men, it's like, oh, if he's open and emotional, that's too feminine. That he
mhm.
needs to stay in his lane and be a man, whatever that means.
Absolutely. And I think
you
that,
know?
yeah, like, society constructs the Black man to be tough, right?
Right.
To not have emotion, to not, uh, you know, care. And I'm very grateful that I grew up with a father, and I grew up with Black men around me who were very comfortable being free and expressing themselves. My dad is someone who tells me all the time, it's okay to cry. Like, why don't you want to cry? You know, and
I
we
love
talk
that.
about feelings, and we address those things. And I look at my guy friends who, we talk about depression. We talk about being depressed in college. Like, that is so real, right? We talk about, fear of failure, fear of not graduating. And those all things are components of mental health, right? Imposter syndrome, um, all those kinds of things. So, yeah, I do think our generation is definitely changing this narrative and taking mental health more seriously. I feel like we're the generation that's like, hey, if we don't feel like going to class today, we're not going to class and we're not going to work because we are just unwell. Like I do see that a lot. I mean, I could say that for myself. I've definitely taken a couple mental health days. Some days
That
I
should
just
be implemented in the school
in the school.
calendar.
Absolutely. Like my school just said that we're doing wellness days and we have 2 days this semester, but that's only because we're not having spring break. And I thought about this and I was like, you know what?
Mm.
We should be having wellness days
Regardless of spring break
break,
or any break.
regardless of a break or anything. Yeah. And I used to, when I was younger, I had a friend who we used to carpool together and she would take mental health days and even my cousins. And I said, oh
Oh.
my gosh, like, why are they taking mental health days from school? Like, they're so lazy. They don't, well, and I love school. So I never took mental health day. But I used to always like make fun of them. And now that I'm older and I'm adult, I see the benefit of that mental health day. And I take my mental health day, like I'll text them, like, guess what I'm doing right now? I'm taking my mental health day. Um,
Nice.
and I do think it's so important because one, your brain needs to relax. You cannot be on high function 24/7.
24/7.
You can't.
Yeah.
And your brain needs that downtime, right? But also if you struggle with anxiety like myself, it can be overwhelming. It can be very stressful. New environment, especially if you're moving. COVID-19 is definitely something that I think has taken a toll on everyone's mental health. Not being able to engage with people, seeing family members,
Right. This pandemic has hurt a lot of us.
right? People are sick. It's scary. So, yeah, I think it's just a lot of combination between ego and social construct within our community in terms of why we don't take mental health seriously. But I do believe that our generation, the youth, they're really we're gonna change that narrative for sure. I can see it happening already.
Right. And like shout out to all the black people on social media and off social media that openly discuss
Yeah,
about self-care, mental
absolutely.
health, Red Table Talk. I feel like they're doing a great job.
Mhm.
Peace of Mind with Taraji. Um I'm like blinking on people, but there's so many people that, are very vocal about it. And I think that's important. I think, like you said, our generation, we're different than some of the other ones that before us. We're flipping the script, we're changing the narrative. So I think, yeah, I agree with that. Did your family and friends growing up take mental health seriously? I know you spoke on that a little bit, but
Yeah, I would say for the most part, we definitely did. My dad's in social work, so
oh, okay.
my mom is in the medical field. So between the two of them in the fields that they're in, I feel like it's almost natural that we spoke about mental health. My dad more so um, expressing feelings. My mom is not an expressive person in terms of feelings and like what's going on. Like she'll keep things bottled inside like me. That's where I learned it from. Um, but my
Okay.
dad is someone who definitely addressed this topic a lot. In terms of my friends, same thing. I went to, and this is something where I think we also uh, struggle with in the Black community, thinking like, oh, mental health is just like some white people thing, right? Like that's
Oh
some,
my God. Yes.
and going to a predominantly white school and living in a predominantly white neighborhood and having pretty much only white friends, when they would complain about being so stressed out or having anxiety or things of that nature, and I would go and tell cousins or tell people, and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, like cut the white BS out," and
No.
that was real like experience. But now, as an adult, as I've experienced some of these things, I'm like, no, mental health is very real, and we we do experience it in the Black community. It's not just some white girl.
Right. And for those who think that, we're just over exaggerating, I wanted to bring up the statistic. In the 1990s, a public opinion poll found that 63% of African Americans believed depression was a personal weakness and only 31% believed it was a health problem. So that means the majority of people in our community believe that it was just, it's not that serious. And I think that yes, certain communities, white people, do have, especially, well off white people have access to therapy and counseling, which can be very expensive. Sometimes our community, we're dealing with financial struggles, so we don't have the time to go to a therapist, but we should still make that effort, when we do have the money or when we do have the time.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And
yeah,
I
it's
do
not
want to
just a
say that,
white problem. Yeah.
yeah, and I do want to say that therapy does not just have to be a financial burden. There are free resources. There are a bunch of influencers also that will host maybe, or therapists that will host a 30-minute free Zoom, right? Um, and therapy for Black girls is a great resource to search if you are looking for therapy for listeners. Also, clinicians of color is a directory of therapists all across. I believe it's New York State. I do think they're expanding, so don't quote me on that. But it's a great platform if you do want to seek counseling services, but you do have a financial burden. Maybe your most of the time insurance doesn't cover therapy. Like I said before, if you are in university, your school, most of the time they do have counseling services and it's included within your tuition. So see,
Right. Like Hofstra, I know, I believe that they give us 25 free sessions. Does your school do something like that too?
our sessions are 100%. We don't have a limit of how many.
Oh, see, okay. So Hofstra, we need to get on that Syracuse wave because that's important. Sometimes college students, we're dealing with so much, and college is very go 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 go. Like you're on to the next. And I feel like, and we're away from our parents. I'm only 45 minutes away, but I think it's important to at least have a third party person to talk to. You
Yeah.
know, Talking is not going to fix the entire problem, but I think it's a step in the right direction, like you said before.
Yeah, even if you're in school, if you're in high school, your counselor, your advisor, universities, your dean of students, that's what they're there for. If you have a chaplain at your school, uh, they're also a great resource. All these three people are bound by confidentiality, so it's the same in respect to a therapist. So they can't disclose what you are talking about to anybody else without your consent. So just thinking about those things, there are so many different resources. So I don't want folks to think that um, you can't access therapy or can't access resources because it's not free. Um, Planned Parenthood doesn't offer therapy, but they do have resources that they can connect you with that
That's
might
great.
be in limits and guidelines. So just I serve as an intern at Planned Parenthood, so I know all this. But yeah, so there are resources there
So
for
people
sure.
have options. You don't have to. Okay. I think that, okay, that's important. I didn't know that. Have you been to therapy? And if so, were you afraid to go?
Yeah, so I have been to therapy. I initially saw a counselor on my own when I was in middle school,
Oh,
fifth grade after my grandfather died. His death took a huge toll on me, and I was just very emotionally unwell. That experience, though, was unhelpful because the therapist thought that I was being abused and called my mom and was asking a series of questions. And this is where I think is a problem with a few therapists. Culturally,
culturally incompetent.
yeah,
Yes.
cultural competence. And this woman specifically, she does work at, or did work, I have no idea now, at my former school. And you would project her own ideas onto patients and students and actually would make it a lot worse. So I never saw her again. And my mom was initially upset that I went to her because of the whole like, don't spread your business out to everyone. No one needs to know this.
Keep it in the house.
But
Yes.
I think that what later I realized it was her, she wanted me to talk to her, you know?
Mm,
So I did try that in fifth grade. I don't know if I was nervous or not. I can't really remember. I never went again. And I don't really feel like that was a real therapy experience because she wasn't a licensed therapist. Um, so,
okay.
and
Right.
in college, my first year after my accident, I I just went to go talk to counselor. I was dealing with death in the family, a series of death I just grew up with, everyone dying around me. So that was one issue. And then it was this trauma from the accident. Um, and that I wasn't afraid to go because I asked friends. I asked a really good friend who's been my mentor, how was her therapy experience, and the one piece of advice she gave me, she was like, therapy is only going to work if you're true and honest about what's going on. If you're
Mm.
unable to be true and honest, then you're not going to gain anything out of it. And I took that experience, that advice, and brought it into my therapy sessions, and I definitely was very true and honest. We focused on grief and we focused on the trauma from my accident. And since then, those things haven't affected me the way they affected me before. I definitely healed from those situations. Recently, because of this new trauma, I've seen a therapist. I've also did group therapy.
Oh, okay. How did that go?
Good sexual violence group therapy. So that actually was something I was very nervous for. Opening up and sharing my vulnerabilities with others was
Okay.
kind
Yeah,
of,
because that's very specific. That's not just broad. Yeah.
yeah. So that whole group therapy session, we only addressed. I mean, we did. If there was other things that came up, like there was a death on our campus community, that we did, use one of those sessions to talk about that. But for the most part, that group therapy topic is focused on the um, relationship abuse and sexual violence that you experience. So we talked about things like negative thoughts, disclosure. We talked about life after the trauma. We talked about contacting,
Wow.
setting boundaries, a lot of different things. So that was definitely pretty cool to experience. And then a new therapy I'm trying is called EMDR therapy. Um, and that is pretty something that I'm looking forward to talking about. EMDR therapy is eye movement desensitization therapy. And basically eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's a form of therapy that you're basically asked to recall the images of what you want to focus on, so it actually helps connect you with your feelings, which is the main reason why I'm doing it. Also, there are parts of my trauma that I don't remember, and that either can be my brain protecting me from that trauma. So your brain does have that response where you tend to forget what happened,
And
or it could be, yeah, or it could be that I actually just don't remember it. Um,
oh, wow.
that's another thing too. So yeah, so this can help you with figuring out it. It won't help you to like visualize, your trauma, but it works for a lot of different things, and helps you process like your self thoughts, your body. So again, like I said earlier, your body knows a lot more than what your brain is processing. So uh, like you know, you you might think you're okay, right? But you think of
Your
a memory,
body holds the trauma.
and yeah, and suddenly you feel a sharp pain in your hip. That might be a response.
Mm.
So that's kind of what EMDR therapy helps you to figure out.
Wow. I think that's really helpful. I didn't even know that was a type of therapy.
Yeah,
So that's
and
really
that's the thing about therapy, which I think is really cool, is to explore your options for therapy. I didn't know this was available either until my therapist mentioned it, and she wanted to try it on me. But there are so many different trauma treatments and therapy treatments. There's PTSD focus. There's drug and alcohol abuse focus. There's grief focus. There's um, anxiety focus, stress focus, school focus therapy, and each therapist is trained in uh, something specific. So I have another therapist who is trained in couples therapy and like relationship abuse and relationship therapy. So I've gone to her to discuss negative thoughts and to discuss overall relationships and like, hey, I'm getting involved and this is like a healthy thing, but this seems so like weird to me. So talking about
Mm,
that,
right.
yeah. So that's the cool thing about therapy. Yeah.
I like that. I think people, you have options. We all experience different types of trauma and abuse where we might need to go to therapy. We have many different type of therapists that we can go to. But I think people need to remember that, these people are very educated in what they do and can help you, but you need to like help them help you. You have to do the work like you said, and be honest and willing to make a change. It's not just like, okay, I'm going to talk to this person for an hour and a half and then that's it, see you next Wednesday. Like, no, you have to do your homework, and try and um they're gonna suggest things and you have to like try and implement that in your life. So I think that's important to note. What is your advice for people who are scared to speak up for themselves when they are dealing with anxiety, depression, or have experienced some type of trauma?
Yeah. I do say know that it's okay if you don't want to share. You don't have to share everything. Um, you can share what you want. It's your story. It's your life. It's your experience. So if you want to share two sentences, you want to share two sentences. To this day, I've disclosed to my parents, but my parents don't know every detail. And the people that do know, um, that I have disclosed to, not everyone knows everything. I'd laugh and I joke if everyone came together, they could all put together the puzzle because everyone has little bits and pieces. Uh,
And you
but
did that intentionally.
yeah, I do that intentionally. I think mainly that's because that's just how I am. I don't talk about my business to people, and I don't share things. Right? That's just my nature. And it's like when people try to figure me out through social media, they never can because I'm all over the place.
Yes.
And that's, I don't know, that's just how I like to live my life. But when I'm ready and when I'm comfortable, I did tell my parents I would share with them, but at this time I'm not ready and I'm not comfortable and I need them to respect that, and they did. um and so yeah, so I would say that is definitely one thing I just want to acknowledge, like it's okay if you don't share everything. Set your boundaries and acknowledge, your ground rules, what works for you and what doesn't. And then my last piece of advice is, if you do want to speak up, it can seem very scary because it can seem like no one will understand, no one will listen, no one will believe you. Um, what I've learned in speaking up is that people understand, people listen, and people believe you. And that's scary. It's very scary to be vulnerable. It's very scary to put yourself out there. But I don't regret putting myself out there because I've been surrounded with so much support and love. And I've also connected with so many people that I never would have connected with before.
That's
Um,
so good. Having a strong support system. That's so
yeah,
good.
I think it's so important. And if you did grow up in with a family or friends that aren't supportive, again, you will
You're
find
not alone.
elsewhere. You're not alone, right? You will find support through Instagram, through other social media channels, a podcast like yours, or
Or
um,
yours, TayTalks.
on YouTube, and just hearing other people share their story. If you're talking about depression, anxiety, there are a bunch of celebrities that have been so open with this. If you're talking about, trauma from surgery, Selena Gomez talks about her surgery that she had. And not even just celebrities, like just regular people, right? We'll talk about.
It's not a far away concept. It can happen to all of us. Yeah.
So yeah, just knowing that you're not alone. But yeah, don't be. It's easy to say don't be scared because I was scared too, but you got it. That's my advice.
I love that. I love that. How do you take care of yourself? What does a tailored self-care routine look like?
um, so I take care of myself through yoga. Um, I right now I'm focused on trauma yoga, because I do still hold a lot of trauma in my body, especially in my hips. So I try to practice yoga twice a week, every Saturday actually. I commit to practice, like I have to practice yoga on Saturdays. Today is the only Saturday that I didn't because I had an event at the same time. I usually do yoga with my cousin, but
Okay.
Yeah, definitely through movement. Going on walks have been very therapeutic for me, especially honestly throughout all quarantine. I've been going on walks. So exercise is really big. I've recently gotten into candles. So lighting
Oh,
a candle
nice.
and just sitting down, drinking tea, reading a book. Um, Journaling is really great.
Yes, write it down. If you can't say it, I think you should write it down.
Yeah, so I honestly actually after my assault, I stopped journaling. I used to journal every day, but writing things out actually made me very sad. So I
Oh,
would
okay.
record myself while I was on my walk about my feelings. And that's actually kind of how the birth of my podcast came about because I would record um, on Snapchat and share, like,
Yes,
oh,
I remember. Yes.
talk about it, and people would be like, you need to like share this with everyone, you need to put this on a podcast, like what are you doing? And I know like this is weird, but I'm so glad I did. And so yeah, just if you can't write it out, talk about it on your phone, talk about it with yourself. And if you can't talk about it, write it on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
um, for me, I like doing rituals. I'm very into like the spiritual holistic wellness. So uh, I remember I did write a letter to my perpetrator over the summer, and I think it was right before the new moon or full moon. Some type of thing happened over the summer, and I made a whole ritual out of it. I did a dance party. I lit a candle. I burned the letter. I ripped it up.
That
And
helped.
yeah, it was a huge weight off my shoulder for sure. I'm trying to think what else. Like living my best life. Yeah, absolutely. And self care isn't just like face masks and all that, which is all great. Like anyone knows,
Right.
in the morning is all about my skin. I have to have my skincare routine is 10 steps. I do all of them. And
Yes.
I have my hair routine. But that's what makes me feel good. That's what makes me feel alive. So if your routine doesn't look like mine or it doesn't look like your best friends, like that's okay because it's your routine. Like do something that is good for you. And I think that stick with it, right? And make it consistent because you'll feel good. You'll feel great, in fact.
Taking care of yourself. I feel like that's the whole
Mhm.
like message of this conversation that we have is, and the message that I don't want to speak for you, but the message that you try to put out is
Yeah,
taking care of yourself, which can
absolutely.
be going to therapy, setting boundaries,
Yeah,
being
boundary setting
upfront.
is so important.
What do you hope your podcast and overall brand Tay Talks does for people?
I hope with TayTalks that it empowers others, um, specifically that it empowers and amplifies voices of color, um, but it really can empower anyone. I hope that it becomes a resource hub for survivors, for victims, for people to connect. And I hope it comes a space where we can all just connect and learn and love and grow. Tay Talks has allowed me to feel more confident in myself and to really, really get through this healing journey. Healing's not linear. It's forced me to set boundaries and to set ground rules and to open up about things I probably wasn't uh, comfortable with opening up to before or scared to open up before. So I do hope that this space is a place where we can all connect, but a place that we can learn and grow from as well, right? So healing,
It's not overnight.
it's not overnight, and it is going to take time because I talk about this all the time, and I think this is my struggle with my own healing journey is that I want to be okay. I just want to be fine already, and the fact that I'm not okay frustrates me. And I get told by my therapist and by my friends, don't rush your healing process. Like it's going to happen naturally. And it will. And I have to trust that. But it's definitely frustrating when you feel like you're making such good progress. And then
Yes.
a trigger happens, or, if you're involved with someone new in terms of intimately, you might freeze, you might disassociate. um if you're with your friends, I know for me fall semester I didn't want to hang out with anybody, didn't want there was 4 friends that I only wanted to hang out with. One of those friends was my best friend from since middle school who goes here, and the other 3 people were friends who are my guy friends, my brothers, and I didn't want to hang out with anybody else.
you wanted to keep your circle small, and that's okay too. We don't need.
That's a normal thing with healing too. Like you sometimes you just need space for yourself. So yeah, that's my biggest thing. Healing's not linear, and don't beat yourself up if you feel like you're taking 10 steps back when you just made 10 steps, moving forward.
I completely agree. Thank you, Taylor, so much for having joining me on the podcast. This is so dope. I love what you're doing with Tay Talks and the whole brand. The
Thank
podcast, I feel like I've learned so much. You can catch Tay Talks, the podcast Unapologetically Me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow Tay Talks on Instagram and Taylor herself at Taylor Madison with two Y's and two N's. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Happy Black History Month.